I've been anticipating this day for a while. There's been a lot of time leading up to this, and I'm been having a hard time trying to put those thoughts in an order that seem succinct. And so we'll see what happens this morning. It's a new year. We have new opportunities, new beginnings, a lot of new things, if you will, but really it's a continuation of the old. It's just the calendar year just turned over, didn't it? But it's a great opportunity for us to kind of have a little bit of a reset. And so as we just consider the new year, as we consider what is before us, this is where God has brought me. 7 years ago, this was embracing the trial was a key phrase that was just resonated and challenged my heart and really helped me wrestle through the health challenge I was going through at the time. And it's really helped me. God's used it mightily since then, and especially in these last 3 months. And so as you see there, I'd sent out that email this week, New Year's Day, put it on Facebook, this challenge that we need to embrace the trial that I may know Him and glorify Him. And I'd like to just share some thoughts with you about that this week, this Sunday, maybe next Sunday as well. But as we see in Psalm 23, we see in verse 4, it says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Philip Keller writes in his book, A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23, he was a shepherd himself. And he said, from a shepherd's point of view, this statement marks the halfway stage in the psalm. It's as though up to this point, the sheep has been boasting to its unfortunate neighbor across the fence about the excellent care it received from its owner on the home ranch and through the winter and spring. Now, here in verse 4, the sheep turns to address its shepherd directly. Personal pronouns of I and thou enter the conversation. It becomes the most intimate discourse of deep affection. There's summer, so this really, in the year of it's interesting how you read through Psalm 23, and it's a year in the life of a sheep. And so it's one full season. And you come to this middle territory, and this would correlate to the summer months leading into the fall months, the trek up to the mountaintop. We see in verse 5, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies, the tabletop, the mountaintop. Okay, so here we are, the valleys. The valleys, they would trek up they would trek up to the mountaintop during the summer. Their summer will be spent in the close companionship and solitary care of the Good Shepherd. Both in Palestine and on our western sheep ranches, the division of the year is common practice. Most of the efficient sheepmen endeavor to take their flocks onto distant summer ranges during the summer. This often entails long drives. The sheep move along slowly, feeding as they go, gradually working their way up to the mountaintops behind the receding snow. By late summer, they're well on the remote alpine meadows above the timberline. During this time, the flock is entirely alone with the shepherd. They're in intimate contact with him and under his most personal attention day and night. This is why these last verses are couched in such intimated first-person language, and it is well to remember that all of this is done against a dramatic background of wild mountains, rushing rivers, alpine meadows, and high range lands. He goes on to say, in the Christian life, we often speak of wanting to move on to higher ground with God, how we long to live above the lowlands of life. We want to get beyond the common crowd to enter a more intimate walk with God. We speak of mountaintop experiences, and we envy those who have ascended the heights and entered into this more sublime sort of life. Often we get an erroneous idea about how this takes place. It's as though we imagine we could be airlifted onto higher ground. On the rough trail of the Christian life, this is not so. As with ordinary sheep management, so with God's people, one only gains higher ground by climbing up through the valleys of life. I appreciate what he says there, and he goes on in that chapter talking about this verse, and he lays it out in greater depth, and I would encourage you all to consider that book. And I have some copies up here actually, but I would really encourage you. It's a very good read. Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. As we know, a trial is illustrated in the life of a sheep as a valley of the shadow of death. It's not a place of death. It's good, really important for us to keep in mind, but it's a place of difficulty, isn't it? It's not an end point, but it's a difficult pathway to the mountaintop, isn't it? We must always remember that we walk through the valley, right? Just through the valley. So as we see this whole idea, embrace the trial that I may know him and glorify him, you know, it was a Monday, I think it was a Monday afternoon in July of 2017 when that phrase just really seemed to stick in my mind. Embrace the trial. And you think about it, those words don't seem to fit well together, do they? You embrace something that you love, that you cherish, you want to get close to it, but a trial tends to be something we want to keep at arm's distance. So it seems a bit odd to put those words together. But the beautiful reality is that when we do put those words together, I have found that there's a tremendous beauty, a tremendous blessing. In order to embrace the trial, I believe that it's important for us to see the message of the trial, which leads to being faithful with the ministry of the trial. So we'll see what this ends up looking like today, but the message of the valley is that God works all things together for good, and that the trying of our faith might be found unto the praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. The ministry of the valley is that we may be able to comfort others with the same comfort that we've been comforted with through the trials, through the valleys. So, simply that's a bit of the outline with one additional point which we'll start off with. And the reality is, I think it's important that we see the ministry, we see the message, and first we're going to see the marks of the valley. So we want to see the marks of the valley. What does the valley look like? What's the valley marked by? I think too often, where's our focus? It's dark. There's those, as the sheep would be led up through the valley, they would see those beady eyes of the predators looking to come and get them. So too often the focus is on the pain of the valley, isn't it? It hurts, Lord. This is no fun. And so when our focus is on those marks of the valley, we miss out on what God is intending for us in the valley. So we want to see the marks of the valley. A valley is simply a difficulty or hardship in life, isn't it? And can I tell you, I think too often we start comparing our valleys, don't we? Well, I don't have a valley like what they're going through, or your valley. That's just really you call that a valley? That's a tough thing in life. I think we miss out on what God's trying to teach us. All of us go through valleys of different shapes and sizes, and they're custom fit to you and me. God custom designs the valley for you and for me. Your difficulty today is difficult to you. Okay, and that's your valley. All right? So embrace it. It's important not to disregard the reality of the trial, is it? I mean, think about it. When you look at the trial, God, as He walks us through the valley, as He leads us through these valleys, are we supposed to just not acknowledge that it's hard? Are we not to acknowledge that it's scary? Are we to not acknowledge the pain? Is that what our shepherd's calling for us to do? Too often we use Romans 8:28, that God works all things together for good, right? And it's as if we're like, cheer up, come on. There's purpose in this, so just smile. You know, it's as if this isn't that bad. No, it is bad. It is tough. We don't want to focus on the pain of the trial, but don't disregard it. Because what's the pain of the trial do for us? Helps us to be dependent. If we just focus on the pain, we allow that to be too big. That becomes the what-if monster, right? But if we allow the pain of the trial, the monsters of the trial, to drive us running to our shepherd, now let's go, right? That's where we need to be. And I think that's an important thing. Don't forget about the reality of the trial. It hurts. It's a struggle. And the reality is, you know, as the thing that's kind of really been a challenge, this is a very different valley for me than the last big one for me, right? I found the last one, I found it very devotional in a lot of ways. This one I'm finding I can't focus very well, and so I'm just having a hard time, and I'm finding that there's habits of, you know, while I was in the hospital, boy, it felt very devotional. We had just great times of just talking about God and what God was doing. And then as that very intentional interaction with people kind of just fades just naturally, my intentional devotional time wasn't picking back up. It's as if I had fallen into this rut. And it's been a challenge. And so the reality is, this is the struggle, isn't it? This is what a valley is marked by. Just because you've learned things doesn't mean you always put them into practice, does it? You know, Paul says, I have not already attained. We understand that. You haven't graduated the school of grace. It doesn't matter how much time I spend on the Word, I still haven't graduated. I haven't graduated to the point where I don't need God's grace anymore, right? Doesn't matter how spiritual you are. Doesn't matter how long you've been walking with God. There's times where you look back and you say, you know what, or you look out, you get honest with the time and you say, I'm not doing as well as I should be doing. That's all of us. Do we want to do better? Yes. I feel like in a lot of ways this valley has been marked by Romans 7. In me that is in my flesh dwells no good thing. The desire is present to do good things, but the ability to perform that which is good, I'm having a hard time finding. The good that I want to do, I don't do. The bad that I don't want to do, I do. Comes to the end, he says, "Oh, wretched man that I am." This is the markings of the valley. And we have to be intentional. I'm finding that we're getting back into that habitual practice of daily devotions again, which just seem to be hard to grab a hold of. I'm just being raw with you guys. This is it. I haven't achieved anything. And in many ways, I think often we can have this perception as if pastors got it all together. Sorry to burst your bubble. Karen and I struggle through this. Like there's a struggle of, boy, you want to. It's just a struggle. And it's been a beautiful thing as the Lord's drawn us closer and closer and closer together. It's been a beautiful thing. But boy, it's hard. And that's what the valley's marked by, isn't it? But as we consider the valley, in the valley, we consider the reality of the valley, but also let's make sure we consider the shepherd in the valley. You're there in Psalm 23. So we consider the shepherd of this psalm. See how the valley is marked by a loving relationship between the sheep and his beloved shepherd. See, when the Lord is your shepherd, we can draw the same conclusions that the sheep draws here. And you've heard these before, so this is not anything new for the most part for most of you. But what I find is a beautiful thing in Psalm 23 where it's just broken down. There's three key ways that it seems to be broken down as I see. And as verse 1 starts off, the Lord is my shepherd. This is a sheep talking about his shepherd. So this is any one of us having a relationship with our shepherd. This is us. This is what we can say. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The word want is an Old English word where I shall not be lacking. And what I see as I study through this more and more, I see the reality that the implication here is that because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall be content. How hard is it to be content in the valley? How hard is it to be content just going through life? And so what we see is that this first conclusion that the sheep is drawing is that because the Lord is my shepherd, I can dwell with contentment because of his provision. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. Ultimately, sheep will only lie down because they're free of fear and conflict and their bellies are satisfied. And so we can rest because in the shepherd's care. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the peaceful and refreshing waters. He restores my soul. We need our soul restored when? Why art thou cast down, O my soul? Why art thou disquieted within me? Hope in God. A cast sheep is one who needs to be restored. A cast sheep is on its back. And that's a deadly position because it cannot get back up once it rolls over onto its back and its feet are in the air. That's a cast sheep. And we can be cast down, depressed, discouraged, struggling. And so he restores my soul when I become discouraged and in despair. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake, and I think that's something really important. It's God's reputation is on the line here. The valley is marked by a God who is leading us, a shepherd who is lovingly leading us with his reputation on the line. So where he leads us, it's for his glory, isn't it? So we see the first conclusion that because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall dwell with contentment because of the shepherd's provision. And next we see that because the Lord is my shepherd, I can dwell with courage because in his presence there is protection in the dark valleys and there's provision on the beautiful mountaintops. He says, yea, though I walk through the valley, the sorrowful valley, the shadow of death. He's saying, I have no reason to fear. I have no reason to fear evil. I have no reason to be consumed with evil. Why? Because you're with me. See, if we're not careful, we look at the valley as a place just simply marked by things that we're afraid of. We make them big and we lose sight of our shepherd, don't we? And when that happens, as sheep we're timid. There's a good reason why God equates us in a great way to sheep. We're timid. We don't learn very well. We have to keep on learning the same lessons over and over and over again. And we run pretty easily. We're skittish. And so the sheep here is saying, I don't have any reason to fear because my valley is marked by my shepherd. Because you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they bring me comfort. He says, you prepare a table. You, my loving shepherd, you prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. It's really interesting that in parts of the world where shepherds take their sheep, they take them to the mountain top. It's like a tabletop, a place of feasting. And so he's saying, you prepare a table of provision before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. And so what a blessing it is. That's a cup of blessing. We can overflow with blessing because of what the provision is that our Savior, our shepherd, is providing for us. And so, but to enjoy those tabletop experiences, what's in between the lowlands and the mountaintop? The final conclusion of this psalm is that because the Lord is my shepherd, therefore I can dwell with confidence because of the Lord's promises of earthly and eternal blessings. Surely. That's a word of confidence, isn't it? Surely. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And the thing that's really neat about that phrase is that what the sheep leave behind, it's really fascinating, just in the normal way that a shepherd takes care of their sheep. Sheep can actually be used to restore ruined plots of land. As they leave behind them, after they eat, they leave behind what they leave behind. It's actually, the manure can help to restore areas that are considered destroyed. But what enables me to leave behind a testimony that's actually a blessing? Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. How is that possible? It's when I know my shepherd. And I go through the valleys. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And what's the promise? I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What a blessing. There's hope there. And see, isn't that a beautiful thing? How often, as we go through a valley, it's easy to lose hope, isn't it? You're there in Psalm 23. Just go ahead to Psalm 27. So we're seeing what the markings of the valley. In an old hymn we're going to sing next, God Moves in a Mysterious Way, William Cooper, he writes these words. And this is where it's so good for us to really pay attention to the words that we sing when we sing these hymns. He says, "Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust Him for His grace. Behind a frowning providence, He hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower." Often we judge the situation, the valley, upon our feeble sense, instead of judging it based upon the truth of God's character, who He is. Too often we focus on the pain of the valley and we lose hope instead of focusing on our God. Again, we're not looking to discount the reality of the trial, right? It hurts. But we don't keep our focus there. We shift gears. Because what happens? When we magnify the pain of the trial, what happens? Do we get it right? Oh, you don't know what I'm going through. It's the worst. No one's ever gone through it like I have. Is that true? Only Jesus could say that, I believe. But don't we get a misguided sense as to what the trial actually looks like? If we just focus on the trial itself, the pain of the trial, it's easy to not have a clear picture or feeble sense. We often operate on faulty theology, resulting in wrong responses to our trials. See, God desires that we see His love for us in the trial and respond in worship by embracing the trial. He orchestrates the very details of the trial, not to destroy us, but to draw us closer to Him. Do we realize that? You know, it's easy to say this. It's hard to do it, right? So this is a truth that we often need to be reminded of, don't we? As we go through these bitter tasting times, the bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. The process usually is often a bitter taste, but God purposes to bring about a sweet and beautiful flower to His glory, to the praise of His glory. And so he goes on to say, in that, as I already mentioned, behind a frowning providence, He hides a smiling face. As we look up and we consider, God, why are you doing this to me? It can seem as if God has this frowning face towards us, right? That He's looking on us in disgust. When life hurts. Isn't that something we struggle with? Well, God just doesn't like me. And so what have we just done? We entered into the realm of Eeyore Christianity, don't we? The monsters are gigantic. They're bigger than life itself. And then we try to inject God into the picture and say, well, He just doesn't like me because he just is playing whack-a-mole with me. Right? And so even when we bring God into the picture, we still don't have a good view of Him, do we? He's got this frowning providence. His face is just, he's just looking on me in disgust. That's why this is happening to me. Oh, bother. Right? The truth behind this statement is that the loving kindness of God is often cloaked in painful grace. But it's not until we know Him that we begin to understand this powerful truth. And so, this is why we need to be looking at God, not just seeing His sovereignty and providence on full display as He's in control of the trial. He's divinely orchestrating the very details of the trial, but He's lovingly orchestrating the details of the trial. And so I think this is where we just have to recalibrate. We need help to do this. Because Eeyore is pretty lonely, and Eeyore gets bigger and bigger in my life when I try to go through it on my own. And I get a more wrong view of God, if we can put it that way, the more I isolate. But when I allow my support system, my support group to speak into my life, I have to be intentional. When I reach out and say, hey, I need help. And that was a challenging thing in the hospital. I had fallen one early morning and I blacked out because my blood pressure, and so I was on bed rest for the whole weekend. I was confined to my bed. And at that time, where Mom and Papa and Karen, the kids, the weekend, it was like, that was the only weekend none of them were able to come down for various reasons. And one of the challenges that I was facing is there's that dark hole of despair is kind of pulling at you to pull you in. And here I am, I felt like I was in the jail cell. What is I don't know, what is it, 10 by 12 jail cell? I don't know, whatever it is. I felt like my hospital room was that. And it was very easy to become more and more like Eeyore. But you know, all I had to do was pick up that phone and call my loved ones. call my pastor friends and say, I'm struggling right now? But do you know what ended up being the case for me that weekend? I don't want to talk to anybody. The valley was marked by despair. And what was I focusing on? Woe is me. Can't believe this is happening to me. And there wasn't any intentional, really focused, it was just a despairing, despondent. But what was the problem? It was me not humbling myself. Say, you know what, I need somebody to help me see clearly right now. And instead of saying, I don't want to pick up the phone and call somebody, which is what I needed to do, I wallowed in my self-pity. And so, in essence, the challenge comes in where I was focusing on the frowning providence of God. I was focusing on the bitter taste of the trial instead of allowing somebody to speak into my life and say, you know, behind that frowning providence, there's a smiling face. The bud, it has a bitter taste, but what's coming is a sweet flower. Psalm 27. If you look at Psalm 27, it's a fascinating psalm. David, he writes, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I be afraid?" Then he walks through that psalm, and he's talking about his enemies. And he's talking about the struggle that he's having. It says in verse 4, "This one thing have I desired," right? And he's talking there of dwelling with God and enjoying fellowship with God. I think it's in verses 6 through 12-ish, and he's talking about those enemies and just the struggle that he's having. And he comes to verse 13, and he says, "I had fainted, lest I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." And if you notice, I had fainted or I had despaired, depending on what your translation is, you see it's in italics. That means it's not actually in the original. The translators, they added that in to help convey the idea that David's saying, this is the struggle that I'm going through, but I would have fainted because of this trial had I not believed that I would see the goodness of God. Why is that important? First week I was in the hospital, I experienced the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life, and it was extended, and I felt like God forsook me. So I was crying out to him, "Lord, I need your help. I can't do this." It was pain that was beyond my comprehension. They finally got in front of the pain sometime in the middle of the night, and it was the next morning. I felt like I was just And I was pretty drugged up. But I felt like I was, mentally, I just felt like I was in a fog of despondency. And part of what was going through my mind, and I remember talking with Karen, Mom, and Pop, and it was just like, just wrestling through. I was actually, at that time, I was talking with people. And a couple guys, I talked with Chris too, and a couple guys on the phone and whatnot, and there was just this struggle, as if I felt like I had been, like God didn't answer my prayer. And I felt forsaken. So I was just kind of like in this funk. I guess it was Eeyore. I was just dopey and struggled. And then in conversation, which was helpful, someone mentioned that, how did Job feel when he was going through all that he went through? I'm not comparing myself to Job as if, no, please understand that. But do you think he felt forsaken by God? He didn't know what was going on, did he? And it was the work of Satan that was trying Job. I don't know what was going on with me, but it felt like it was the work of the devil. But God only knows, right? And then at some point, I think it was in conversation with Chris, it was just all of a sudden the light bulb turned on. It was like, but you know what? I didn't forsake my faith. And that was the catalyst to helping in another extreme painful moment, not as bad, where I didn't fall into that despondency. And that verse, Psalm 27, verse 13, I had fainted unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of God, of the Lord in the land of the living. Well, why? Why didn't I lose faith? Why didn't I lose heart? Because of what the valley was marked by. What had God done? Until 10,000 years into eternity, I can only give God praise for what he did leading up to the trial. That his hand working and orchestrating, his providential hand divinely orchestrating the very details of the trial, bringing getting a doctor's appointment early, and then the biopsy result coming back before it was supposed to. And God divinely orchestrating, having me go to Westchester Medical Center and be under the supervision of just expert care with regards to leukemia. And it gave me hope. It encouraged me. I had fainted. I would have lost heart. I would have totally just turned into one of my roommates, who will remain unnamed. I could have turned into a discouraged angry, unholy man. But God. Because the trial, the valley was marked by the invisible finger of God orchestrating the details of the trial. And God kept reminding me of those. And people, loved ones coming in and calling in. And we were talking through. It was an incredible devotional time of just praising God for what God did. I had fainted. Unless I had seen the goodness of God so that I would believe that I would see the goodness of God. If our trial's not marked by intentionally seeing the hand of God at work, Eeyore is going to be us, isn't it? And as I already told you, it's not to say once you get that, you're like all set and going, right? Like you never dip into that pit of despair. That Psalm 40 verse 1, I waited patiently for the Lord and He inclined unto me and He heard my prayer. He lifted me up out of that miry clay, the miry clay, the pit of noise, the dark, despairing pit. That was always around the corner. It's like peering around the corner saying, I'm going to get you. And that's what it's like in the valley, isn't it? You know what I'm talking about. But what keeps us from, we dip our toe into it. Maybe we step into that despairing darkness. But what keeps us from staying there? God lifts me up out of the horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and He sets my feet upon a rock, the rock of truth. I had fainted unless I believed that I would see the goodness of God, because I had seen the goodness of God. We have to see what the valley is marked by, don't we? Acknowledge the reality it hurts. Acknowledge the reality that we may not have all the answers. And we might not have a great prognosis. We might not have the good leukemia. We might have the leukemia that keeps you in the hospital for a year and a half kind of deal. In and out of the hospital. That's something to praise God for, isn't it? Acknowledge the reality. So whatever lays before you in 2025, whatever valleys are ahead of you, whatever valleys you may find yourself in right now, acknowledge the reality of it, that it hurts. It's not fun. It's painful. Maybe it might be a relational problem, a relationship between you and somebody else. It's not fun. It's not something enjoyable. Acknowledge that reality. Don't discount it. But then acknowledge your shepherd lovingly leading you through whatever valley. And focus on His attributes. Focus on His goodness. Focus on Him. And allow Him to help you not stay in that hole of despair when you step into it. And allow the powerful truths about who God is and what He does to bring you out. And help you be stabilized by the rock of truth. Giving you hope that you will see God's goodness because you have seen His goodness. One last thing that I just want to share. John chapter 12. Jesus is on his way to the cross. It's that week, Passion Week. And in verse 27, Jesus says, "Now is my soul troubled." He said, "And what shall I say?" He said, "Should I say, Father, save me from this hour?" Should I say, "Father, get me out of this? This valley's too big. This is too much for me"? I mean, Christ had a whole different valley than you and I will ever have, didn't he? And he's saying, I'm struggling here, but should I say, "Lord, I don't want this, get me out of it"? So he says, "My soul is troubled, so what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour." But he says, "But for this cause came I unto this hour." Then he says in the beginning of verse 28, he says, "Father, glorify thy name." That's a great thing for us to follow Jesus' lead, isn't it? When we focus on the dark marks, the painful marks of the valley, we don't follow Christ's lead, do we? We say, "Father, get me out of this. Why are you doing this to me?" But when we focus on our loving shepherd and his providential hand, his loving hand, that everything that that comes to me, that happens to me in life, first passes through the loving hands of my loving shepherd. When I don't dismiss reality, it hurts, but I focus on the fact of this is who my God is, I can then say, "Father, don't save me from this hour. Don't take this from me. Father, may you be glorified." And I got to come back to that over and over and over and over again, because too often I want to be Eeyore. Too often I want to stay in that miry clay, in that pit of noise, in that dark hole of despair, and say, "Why me?" Instead of saying, "Why not me?" Instead of embracing the trial, because it's in the trial, Lord willing, we'll see this next Sunday. I'll take this further. The perspective in the valley is very different, because it's in the valley that you see the mountaintops in a very different way. They're transcendent, they're majestic. And there's truths of God you learn following your shepherd through the valley that you can't learn any other place. And therefore, when I anchor myself there, intentionally, I have to keep coming back to this. I can embrace the trial. I can wrap my arms around the trial. Not saying, "Lord, give me more and more of this pain. I love it." No. But I can embrace it. I can count it all joy when I fall into those various trials, right? Because knowing this is the trying of your faith that works patience. I can know that I can embrace the trial so that I can know Him more, so that I can ultimately glorify Him most. So I can end up saying, "Father, don't save me from this. I want you to be glorified." So that's where we need to be. So I appreciate your prayers. Now I guess maybe you know how to pray for me a little bit better. Pray that I won't be Eeyore. And if you don't mind, I'll pray the same for you. Because we all can be there, can't we? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time. Lord, you are so good to us in ways that it's hard to understand or describe, and often in ways that we forget. We struggle to remember your goodness to us. Father, we need your help so that we don't faint and lose heart and walk away from our faith. Lord, help us to thrive through the trials, not just survive them. Help us, Lord, to embrace the trial for your glory. Help us to see you in the trial. Help us to see you in the valley and listen to your still small voice. And Lord, may we say, Lord, may you be glorified. Thank you for what you will do. We do pray these things in Christ's name.